Right, is everyone ready to kick off? All the judges ready to kick off? I'm just wondering if there's any literatic people that want to come in, but I'm sure if they want to come in, they probably. Oh, did she leave?
No, it was the man.
Yeah, some meeting or something online.
No, right, okay. Well, it's nice and cozy in here with just us, so we'll just get going. Okay, so big final. The winner of this will be going through to Scotland and Northern Ireland in probably around February time. Very nice little trip away for the Northern Irish schools. All the Scottish schools had to get the train and it's all boring for them. We get to get on a plane. Very exciting. So yes, that's what you have to look forward to. And the motion before the House is the television licence fee should be abolished. Speaking for the motion, we have Royal School Armagh. Speaking first is Callum, and speaking second is Simon. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Callum Weir. I'm currently studying politics, history and English literature with the hopes of doing classical studies in university. I'm interested in music and literature with specific focus on Irish folk music and the poems of Seamus Heaney, respectively.
Good.
Fair enough.
And, yeah.
I'm Simon. I'm currently studying Lit, Geography and Sociology, and I hope to study Economics at university. I don't really do a lot else, but I'm goalkeeper for the first 15 hockey team, and I'm also vice-captain of the third rugby team. And as a little side note, Laura's added in here, unfortunately I will never be as fabulous as her. So, that's it.
Well, big welcome again to Royal School Armagh. Good luck. And then for Cross and Passion, speaking against the motion, speaking first is Saoirse Hughes. Saoirse, just introduce yourself.
I'm Saoirse Hughes. I'm Hiker in Cross and Passion College. I study English literature, drama and theatre studies and health and social care. I have a particular passion for Irish traditional music and musical theatre, and I hope to study global change management in Holland.
In Holland?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Bindishan. It's in school.
Very nice. I love interesting facts. Okay. And I'm Conleth. Can you top Holland?
No.
I'm Conleth. I'm the head boy of Cross and Passion College. I study English literature, history and religious studies, and I want to study law, but not in Holland.
That's fine. All good enough for me. Right. Okay. Well, big welcome to Cross and Passion as well. Good luck. And you all know our wonderful judges. I've introduced them already with their impressive bios, but again we've got Sinead, Robbie and Joanna joining us to give the team some grilling. But yeah, I think we should just kick off and get rid of these nerves. So we're going to start first with speaking for the motion for Royal School Armagh. 3-minute speech. I'm going to knock on the table at 30 seconds. So whenever you're ready, Callum.
Thank you. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we firmly believe that the BBC licence fee should be abolished. We define this as total abolition of the fee imposed on anyone that owns a connected TV. The fee stunts our ability to choose what content is deserving of our money, as my partner will outline, and has less cultural value than you may think. Firstly, we must pose the question, what is the point of the BBC? The 6 public purposes are the BBC's own answer to this question, which were set up in the 1930s and really has no bearing on our society today. Here, promotion of education and cultural unity are stressed at the fore of the BBC's beliefs. Let's start with the promotion of education. This is not a necessary core belief in 2015. The word here is globalisation. We live in an information age where there is no need for televised education. There is a greater amount of information more readily available online. And whatever educational or artistic work that is duly wasted, as was the case with the BBC website The Space, which spent 3.6 million on eccentric digital films and Syrian puppet art. As for cultural unity, does our opposition really believe that countries without public broadcasting systems lack a cultural unity that we have? I mean, I must admit that it could be hard to call a United Kingdom that narrowly avoided Scottish independence last year culturally unified. On this point, the BBC runs BBC Radio Asia for those of Asian origins. While this may, in some vague sense, unify Asians, it stunts social assimilations for all Britons and is contradicting to the claims made in the 6 points. Perhaps this is due to the outdated nature of the principles in the BBC. My opposition would have you believe that if we were to make the BBC a commercial organisation, it would somehow evolve into a channel that lacks anything that caters to its niche markets. These include horticultural programmes or history documentaries as two examples. For both, however, there are alternatives. If you are in search of a history documentary, the Yesterday channel provides a commercially successful basis for this. As for horticultural items, the aforementioned internet is always on hand. Therefore, the idea that we would lose these programmes if the BBC was to be privately run is absurd. Therefore, as a proposition, we propose that you should not pay for TV that is unnecessary, over-expensive and outdated in principle. Therefore, I urge you all, vote proposition. Thank you.
Right, well done, Callum. Okay, so first speaker speaking against the motion is Saoirse. Are you ready?
Madam Chairman, esteemed judges, members of the proposition, members of the House. The proposition have clearly attempted to dupe the House this evening with half-truths and scare tactics, and before I proceed I must establish some balance. Mr Weir, unfortunately you are guilty this evening of an error in your notion that the licence fee, and therefore the BBC itself, have no cultural relevance, and that there is no need for televised education. I disagree. I think that we all know any sick days we may have had as a child were spent watching documentaries or even more subtly educational programmes. Instead of taking this motion as licence, pardon the pun, to rail against the lack of cultural appropriateness of the BBC, we should instead look at what the institution stands for, as Mr Weir attempted to do. You would have us believe that the BBC is nothing, or the TV is nothing more than the box that sits in the corner of our living room. But this is not the truth. It is a lens through which we see the world with clarity, objectivity and certainty. At 90 years old, it is the world's oldest broadcasting service. As the Director of Policy at the BBC, James Heath, said, few other countries are in better creative shape than the UK. Britain's competitive position has not come about by accident, but is, at least in part, due to this country's vision and foresight in creating institutions like the BBC. 50% of the countries in Asia and Africa and 2/3 of the countries in Europe use television licences to fund public television. But money isn't the problem, ladies and gentlemen, despite Tory MP John Whittingdale's comparison of the licence fee to the poll tax. Poland decreased their licence fee to 1/3 of the UK's, and evasion rates rose. In 2014, 8 out of every 10 of us said that we were satisfied with the BBC, providing trustworthy news and high-quality, essential programmes. And we were right to. A 2012 report from a cross-party committee of MPs claims that the licence fee has no longer long-term future, lobbying instead for a household levy. In Germany, a broadcasting levy was recently introduced, and the main beneficiaries were, wait for it, the regional government themselves. Perhaps this explains Parliament's votes to decriminalise the licence fee. This is going to be death by 1,000 cuts, Madam Chairperson. If we abolish the licence tax fee, then we abolish the BBC itself. The BBC is the people's broadcaster. It is sustained by the life of the licence fee. And this is a life worth saving. Thank you.
Well done. Okay, strong starts from both sides. We're now going to move on to the second speaker from Royal School, speaking for the motion. Simon, whenever you're ready.
Great.
That's good teamwork.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start off with a joke. I could tell you that a ridiculous 6% of our population are dragged through the courts every single year to dragged through the courts to experience the joys of whether deciding that their licence fee is actually meant to be paid or not. But in reality, and I hate to break it to Saoirse about these death by 1,000 tiny cuts, it's actually 12%. The fact remains that the BBC, rather than being this wonderful cultural and enriching experience that it is, has instead moved away from this idea of doing what's good for the nation and has instead moved into doing what's better for their pockets. In fact, the amount of prosecutions for avoiding TV licence fee has risen 300% over the past 3 years, and I doubt that your 80% satisfactory rate from the people in 2013, I think it was, Ms. Hughes, you said, I doubt that still stands today for the majority of people who are being hunted down vociferously for this. I'd also like to move on and say that about 70%, that's 126,000 people who are convicted every year of this, 70% of these people are actually earning minimum wage or less. So what we have here is we have a licence fee that costs £145.50. And this whole idea of cultural unity is the main thing that BBC focus around nowadays, with Britain being ever more diverse in culture. But why is it then that we're bringing 126,000 people every year through the courts that can't actually afford to pay this fee? Oh, and it gets a lot better. If you can't afford to pay this fee, you're then going to be charged between £800 and £1,000. So if you can't afford £145, how, may I ask the floor and the judges, are you expected to pay this massive amount? In a sense, this is a big division in our society. This is not cultural unity, this is cultural imperialism, the middle class bureaucracy. I'd also like to point out that the BBC, while it is this wonderful cultural entity, is no longer acting for us in any way. In fact, £60 million was spent in severance packages to top BBC officials. That roughly equates to 412,000 licence fees, which more than covers the 180,000 people that are, first of all, brought to court every single year. Now, I don't want to get caught up on all these court cases, so instead I'll move on and I'll go on and talk about the sporting side of things. The BBC for decades was renowned as being one of the few channels to actually offer sports to the widespread majority. And recently we've seen it lose the Premier League, the UEFA Cup Championships. It's also lost nearly all of Formula 1, that's going in a couple of years. And also now Discovery Communications, which run Eurosport, have gained the rights for Europe for the next 4 Olympics, which means that in 2022 the BBC will no longer be allowed to effectively view and send out to millions of people around the globe the Olympics. And also I ask you, if this is just a tragic shame for the BBC, then why are all of the other advertising-based players in the market able to provide such a service? Why are we paying for this when it can be funded by corporate fat cats instead of hitting the people hardest who are on the breadline anyway? Thank you for your time.
That's very good. And closing off the speeches for Cross and Passion, we've got Cranwood.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can't buy much for 39p, yet for less than the price than 2 Freddos a day, we can access the world's best TV and radio. Let's be serious. When we abolish the licence fee, we abolish the BBC. Now, Mr. Brown, you talked about the 6% of the population who are being dragged through the courts. That 6% means that 94% are on the side of the opposition tonight because they willingly pay the licence fee. The average fine through the courts is actually £178, not the £800 to £1,000. Subscription and advertising are not viable options in an already saturated broadcasting market. The question of abolishing the licence fee is actually a question about abolishing access. 250 million people tune in around the world to the BBC every week, 6 times more than the worldwide subscription of Netflix. That means that 1 person in every 28 people in the world uses the BBC every week. Mr. Weir, you suggested subscription, talking about the Yesterday channel and all those kind of history channels. When we need them, we should pay for them. In order to maintain the current level of funding for the BBC, the Financial Times reports that 43% of the population would have to pay £24 per month. That's double the current licence fee. There's no obligation with subscription, so it won't be paid. And Ofcom commissioned reports stated that with subscription, the usage of the BBC would fall from 97% to next to nothing. But I suppose it would still be higher than the 0.06% who currently use Netflix. We pay a licence fee to ensure access to everyone. A subscription would discriminate in its access to our population. Mr. Brown suggested advertising, the ITV or Channel 4 model in other terms. To the naked eye, advertising seems like a sensible option. But politicians would love this. The Conservative MPs who don't pay their TV licence fee would love this because they would be able to buy influence in our public service broadcasters. They will be able to speak unchallenged, leading to a misinformed, disinformed and uninformed population. Furthermore, the quality of TV and radio will go down across the board. as businesses ration smaller and smaller amounts to each provider. This will not be good for our society. Ladies and gentlemen, the television licence fee should not and must not be abolished. Thank you.
Okay, great speeches from everyone. Whenever I raised this motion in my staff room today, the biggest argument that came up was, but what about the Great British Bake Off? We can't live without that. So I'm glad that the standard is much higher here this evening. We're now going to go on to the judges' questions. Firstly, for Royal Scholar Maths, Cross and Passion, you can take a bit of a breather. I'm going to do like we've done in previous rounds, take all 3 questions, then you can come back to them in any order you like. So we'll start with Sinead.
My question is, in terms of advertising, how is it not important that we have a national broadcaster that is not influenced by outside corporations? And aside from the political argument, which is a valid one, how do we not need a broadcaster that has editorial independence and can dictate its own terms in terms of what programming goes on, not just in terms of news content but also program content?
Robbie?
I suppose it's in 2 parts and it's kind of around the same thing. First of all, what's the matter with Syrian puppet art? And the BBC Asian network, a lot of people would argue that is not just for Asian communities, that is about social cohesion, that is about giving an ethnic minority a place within the overall cultural output of the British Isles, and just why that is seen as kind of in some way an argument against the BBC, whereas a lot of people would see it as an argument for.
Thank you. And Joanne?
Well, mine was going to be around that whole cultural thing about
God.
I picked up that one too, but just that whole the diversity that is celebrated within the output of, even here we've got BBC Ireland and we've got Irish language broadcasting, you've got various different radio networks, and we've also got then the regional outputs, BBC Scotland, BBC Wales, that ethos being lost. We've just seen local TV here being bought by another local channel being bought by elsewhere. So where does that all become? It is being driven by the commercial thing, and that cultural diversity that is in the output even, and the input is to be celebrated.
Thank you, judges.
Okay.
Right, any order you want?
I'd first of all like to address the first question regarding advertising and having a national broadcasting that isn't influenced by the government in any way. But I'd just like to point out that the BBC did actually block a panorama documentary into systemic child abuse within the UK government. And it wasn't until Channel 4, which is run by, as you know, an advertising scheme, as Mr. Byrne said. Yep, thank you for that. So we do actually have government influence going on within the BBC. It's not as if this is essentially state-controlled media. The reason it was set up was so that we would have this fair and impartial news, but I think I have it written here that in a poll of The Guardian, which as we know is a left-wing newspaper, 63% people polled said that even they felt there was a strong left-wing bias coming from it. So, over the recent migrant crisis, it's not that it's uninfluenced, it's definitely very influenced, and there even reports been coming out of the BBC that there is definitely a heavy left-wing bias. So it's not this impartial creature that it used to be. It's become this warped entity that really is skewing our vision in Britain today.
And what about the impact of the corporate fat cats that were mentioned, aside from political influence, and how actually corporations may influence the editorial agenda if advertising is brought into the mix?
Well, you see, this may be my right-wing bias, but I'm actually in favour of this, because if you look at what's happening on ITV now, the X Factor is definitely falling down ratings. So what that's going to do is that's going to enforce people to try and come up with a new idea and a new way to progress further and then bring its views back up. Like I'm sure you remember, Dancing on Ice was a huge hit for ITV. And what's going to come up now is the BBC are going to face problems with, as was mentioned, the Great British Bake Off and Strictly Come Dancing. Eventually they will go into decline. And what I don't want to see is my money that I spend for television being put into those to keep them like flogging a dead horse. I don't want to see that happen. At least with an advertisement-driven place, the corporate fat cats want more money, so at least they're going to want to try and produce better programs for us. I mean, the American system has produced some, I'm not saying it's flawless by any means, but I am saying it has produced some excellent shows such as Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. The idea being that they make it the best for them, because then obviously they're going to get more money out of it.
I'm not sure that the Great British Bake Off is going to go into decline. I think think one of the issues at the time with advertising is it would be suddenly sponsored by, and product placement would appear, and therefore it's actually, it loses its editorial integrity.
But BBC does actually have product placement. Like, I'm not sure if you've listened to Radio 2 recently, but every now and again they tell you what they're drinking, what they're eating at this particular point in time. So product placement has wormed its way sneakily into the BBC mindset. So it's not as if they're being funded solely by taxpayers. They are already getting advertisement money in there.
And they get told off by Ofcom for that.
Yes, they do, but they still do it, and that's the point. The BBC is no longer held accountable. It's being warped into this ad-paying entity anyway, so why are we paying money for it when it can easily do that?
Do you want to move on to Robert John's question?
Yeah, I'm going to take that question. First of all, you mentioned my point on Syrian puppet art. I don't know if you've seen any Syrian puppet art, Mr. Best, but usually it doesn't look like it cost 3.6 million. The point was the cost. And I mean, as much as you may enjoy Syrian puppet art, it usually should not be driven up to such a high cost. You also mentioned about BBC Asia actually creating a sense of kind of cultural unity. I would also point you as well, Mrs. Mahaffey, you've mentioned actually separate language, indigenous language radio stations. These are for cultural unity in these areas. These are not UK-wide cultural unity radio stations. And, as I've said, the 6 Points actually tries to emphasise cultural unity on a British basis. And now that we have come into the era of multiculturalism, undoubtedly we have, this is an outdated point that the 6 Points of the BBC licence fee puts forward.
But on top of that, I would just like to add that if there is a market for it, which there clearly is, I mean, the BBC would have made these channels if it wasn't for that. ITV and STV, that's local for Northern Ireland, local for Scotland, also have local programmes like Leicester Spotted Ulster, which feature people from the area and feature the culture from the area. And the idea for us is that if there's an advertisement paying area for that already, and it's a successful model, why then the BBC trying to fill in this gap as well? It's equally able to be done on an advertising scheme, so why are our money going towards this whenever it really doesn't need to be?
Happy with those responses?
Is there not something about more the message that it sends as a country? Is there not something about having a BBC Asian network? If it's only the Asian community listening to it, and then it is picked up by a commercial station or whatever commercial broadcaster, but then all of a sudden that doesn't become a financially viable model. So then what do we do? So then there's nobody. My point is that broadcasting is about more than financial viable models.
Yeah,
There needs to be more to it than that. It transcends that kind of commercial capitalist kind of argument, I think.
Yeah, but I think you are talking again about multiculturalism. The fact is that the 6 Points on which the BBC was based directly contradicts multiculturalism in calling it cultural unity. As well as that,
but I don't want to get off the point, but can you explain the difference between cultural unity and multiculturalism?
The idea is that multiculturalism explores and enjoys the diversity that different cultures can bring, whereas cultural unity is the idea of creating, like, I always like to imagine as having all these different colour tints of paint, all these bright, wonderful colours. The idea is celebrating those colours for what they are. I don't mean colours in terms of skin, but I mean like reds and yellows and blues and all that. I would just like to point that out. And whenever we go into this cultural unity idea where we all have to have these British ideas and all these wonderful things, we just sort of pour it all into this soup, and everything, all the colours and all the wonderful vibrancy of that goes away. So cultural unity is just sort of a one big tin filled with it, whereas multiculturalism is the idea of celebrating different ethnicities and their cultures together, rather than combining them all together and saying we're proud of them all. Does that make sense?
But as long as they're financially viable?
It's not as long as they're financially viable, as I've said, with the ideas that there are other shows as well. The UTV also had a show on for the local areas in England at one point, where it explored what it's like to be a Muslim living in Birmingham today, which obviously has quite a heavy Islamic population. And it was actually an insight not only to Islamic people who are around the rest of the UK and seeing this wonderful idea, but it's also showing British people that life is actually different to other people around the UK. So it actually explores that and it broadcasts it to the rest of it, and that's from not necessarily commercial idea, but that's definitely from people at least wanting to inform you at some point.
Okay. I'm going to move on from that to questions for Cross and Passion, if you guys are ready. I'm going to start with Joanne this time, so you got your first bite of the apple in case someone steals your question
Okay,
again.
it might have been stuck at the top, but you said tax, and then all of a sudden you went fee. So, stuck at the top. So, how would you see? Obviously, you support the licence fee, but how do you reconcile that with that whole criminalisation of people who can't afford to pay, or maybe don't want to pay it and make the decision not to pay it?
Robbie?
I take issue slightly with your idea that an abolition of the licence fee is an abolition of the BBC. I'd like to know if you think there are any other viable models that aren't pure subscription based or purely a licence fee as we have it. Is there a middle ground?
You said that 94% of the population are on the side of the opposition because they willingly pay the licence fee. I wonder how willingly we actually pay the licence fee. You know, are we willingly paying, or are we institutionalised, or are we scared of being thrown into an institution and being locked up for not paying it? Is it right that we should punish people that don't pay the licence fee?
Okay. Social comments, any order you want.
So you were saying, Rowie, about the abolition of the licence fee is the abolition of the BBC, and you were taking issue with my claim of like full abolition being the abolition of both. What I will say is that at the minute, 98.98% or 89% of the BBC is funded by the licence fee, which is 2.365 million, and there's 30 million that comes from the Open University, from merchandising, and from some small commercial interests. 30 million in grand scheme of things isn't a lot of money. So if we abolish the licence fee, which means, as the proponents have defined tonight, it is total abolition of the licence fee, then that means you remove that 98.89% of the funding to the BBC. When an organisation gets that chunk of money removed, then the organisation will fail. Now, I have already addressed in my speech the viable alternatives, or the proposed viable alternatives, and I said that advertising isn't going to work because we're not injecting any more money into our country, into the businesses in our country. Sinead represents businesses in her job, and she'd understand that they only have a certain amount of money that they can spend on these things. And if the BBC starts to compete with ITV, Channel 4, and Channel 5 and any other commercial broadcasters, TV or radio, then the quality of all of them will go down because there's no magic pot of money that can fund them all. All of that money will be spread amongst them all, and then the quality will decline.
Okay, it was just. But do you think there's any middle ground between those? Do you think there's any?
Well, based on
the
the definition of the proposition tonight, they don't leave us any room for the middle ground. They say that it's total abolition, so we have to be it on the terms of the proponents tonight, and that is total abolition. Now, when we go to Sinead's question, we are not against reforming the BBC licence fee, and we understand that perhaps with the minimum wage, Mr. Brown said that the minimum wage people, the biggest majority of that 6% who go through the courts every year, are people on the minimum wage. Now, we believe that there should be some payment plan, or should be some way of making that instead of a yearly fee. Perhaps it can be looked at in some other way to reform it, or look at a staging process of it. But complete abolition, we're completely against.
And also, in the terms of Sinead's question, the word institutionalised used, I would say that it's not institutionalised as in the connotations of that being almost brainwashed or you being forced onto that belief that you must pay. I think that the BBC genuinely, it's the oldest broadcasting in the world. It's something that we've grown up with and that we genuinely accept as a representation of us. Like I know this is anecdotal, be it or not, but I know people who have been directly involved with the BBC. I've been involved in programmes that have been on the BBC, and it has been a part of my growing up in Britain, and it is a representation of the British people, and we are paying for it through our licence fee, and it is something that the majority of people are willing to do.
Are they willing?
I believe so, because of what I've just said. But it is something that is part of our life, and it is something that we feel that when we pay that fee, we have license to, pardon the pun again, to have input on the BBC and what is created and what is. There's the reforms also. I was part of a focus group, and they're going to put more undiscovered talent and youth creation into some BBC channels, and they are. I feel that even people growing up now will be more willing to pay that fee because they know that they are having direct input into what is being created.
And I think it's what they're willing to pay the licence fee for. They're willing to pay the licence fee to ensure access to everyone. Whenever we introduce a subscription, we say that only the people who can afford to pay the subscription are the people who deserve to have access to objective information. In a democracy, we cannot underestimate the value of objective information. Now, I know
in some ways, some people would say, and that's why people are conscientiously objecting to paying it.
The people who
so they're essentially, for want of another description, you could say it's a subscription fee, because as soon as you have a TV you can plug in, you're saying, okay, you have to pay your licence for £145.
And whenever they pay the license, or the people, I do use an example of the 6%. We need to explore the 6% to the people who are actively unwilling to not pay the licence fee. So then we need just to examine that, and there's a bigger proportion of Tory MPs who are unwilling to pay the licence fee than many other sectors in the populations, because what the both parties are across the sector in the government, they can agree that they all hate the BBC. Michael Gove, the Lord Chancellor, has now decided to decriminalise the TV licence because it doesn't reflect the interests of the Conservative Party in the best way possible, because it has an objectivity that they don't like, because they analyse and they try and make the kind of they challenge the assertions of the government, they challenge the assertions of the state, so it's like independent to a certain degree from the state as well, and that there's something that we should be willing to protect in order for ourselves. It's like a form of self-protection almost.
So if people can't afford or don't want to watch the BBC, can we not just block the TV signal and they don't get it?
Perhaps it's an alternative, but it's better to solve the causes of that problem. So if they can't afford, we need to look at that, and that's Saoirse and I are saying that we are not against reforming the BBC. The proponents haven't given us the space for that tonight, so we have to oppose their total abolition. So we are for a reform of the BBC in making the BBC a bit more flexible. In December 2016, the Charter has to be renewed. We are for the conversation. Saoirse's been involved in the focus group. We are all for the conversation about renewing the BBC, fit for the 21st century. And just to pick up on something that they said about this British values are now multicultural values, and the BBC, through the Asian Network and through so many different programmes and money that's been invested in all these, make sure that cultural identity and that cultural identity that they have to creatively produce to the country, they are making sure that's multicultural identity, and so the lines are becoming the scale is calibrated more towards multiculturalism, and rightly so.
Okay, so just happy. Probably move out to the audience now, because this hasn't happened yet this evening because we're 2 mock debates. We're going to get some questions from the audience, and then I'm going to let you teams loose at each other. So you're going to have to think of the killer question that you really want to put to the other team. So we're going to take some questions, have a bit of crossfire, and then go back out before your summations. So I'm sure we've got some questions from the floor. I hope we've got some questions from the floor. You were full of questions earlier, guys. What's happened? Anybody? Joel?
I'd like to ask both teams kind of to address what they think of broadcasters aren't just place channels that you flick through. They're also in some way agenda setters. They set an agenda, and the tone on the kind of pro-BBC side. I mean, are you saying that the BBC doesn't set an agenda wrong sometimes in any way? Think of the Jimmy Savile scandals. Think of numerous occasions that have now weighed up and have completely transformed programmes like Newsnight, because the BBC just got their line on things wrong. I mean, why are we funding an institution that has less trust in it now than there's ever had before? Isn't there something problematic about the state sponsoring someone's line, any line, to set an agenda about various things that maybe we should think about more carefully in the 21st century? And then on the other side, I mean, you have exactly the opposite problem, which is that we go to the BBC for everything. It's really authoritative, and how do you? Where do we go without a BBC to look at to find out what the scoop is on Russia's latest dodgy dealing? The measure of what people are or not prepared to accept is or isn't happening in the world is often whether or not it's on the BBC homepage. That's quite a serious thing.
Okay, I'm going to try and squeeze some more questions out of you guys. Yay, Ross Gorma. Can you give your name just for the judges and best individual?
Yeah, Laura. Just about the misuse. It's about education. So you said that whenever we were younger, you had a sick day, you would go and you'd watch those TV shows about education. We don't need these services anymore. I mean, do you think we have the internet, we have all these other options available to us? Is the BBC really still necessary for those options?
Thank you. Cross and Passion, you must have something you want to say to Ross Gorma. Yeah. Name?
Lisa.
Yeah, of course.
As much said, the licence fee is hard at the BBC, and what does the proposition propose the BBC to do if we abolish this rather than turn to advertising?
Okay, I'm not going to squeeze you anymore. I'll let you deal with those. You've got 2 questions each, basically. I'm going to go to Ross School first, so if you want to come back to your questions.
May I just address very quickly one of the points put to us about, say, if a news story is on the BBC News homepage, it's seen as a big story. There are alternative news outlets absolutely readily available. In fact, Channel 4 News actually, as a commercially run company, has some of those in-depth and important news stories in the BBC, in the British kind of media, as well as that internet news. There's the Huffington Post or Slate or any number of media outlets that you can get now information from. And I think that instead of a BBC News outlet that seems to control everything is what we already have.
I'd like to pick up on Lisa's point. The alternative is, if we don't go down the advertising way, that we instead do what we did with Royal Mail, which is where we float on the stock market and get individual and private buyers to buy into it. But for us, that's a very dodgy way to go, because sometimes people don't want to give away shares, where at least with advertisements we have people who are vying for competition and vying to be able to change the network for however they want. And though that is sometimes dangerous, at least that gives us variety across the board. Whereas if we floated on stock market, people who get large shares early on will be reluctant to give them up unless they get insane amounts of money off of it, which really does call into question. I mean, the BBC is already essentially run by the government, and as I've said, it already it blocked the Panorama report into looking into the government's child sex abuse scandal, which was actually under the Labour government, not these evil Conservatives that Mr Burns keeps going on about. Sorry, just to point facts in your face, but that's that. So I would definitely say that advertisements are the safer way to go in this instance, rather than what we've done with Royal Mail, where the Royal Mail doesn't have political influence, but the BBC certainly do, and that's why it's important that we have fair competition to be able to have all sides represented.
Okay, going to let Cross and Passion answer their questions. Be thinking about your main question for Cross and Passion. I'll be back to you in a bit.
Thank you.
So I'll go to Joel's question first. You talked about the agenda setters and setting the tone for the country, and I understand, as the BBC held their hands up afterwards, that the Savile scandal was a massive mistake, not only in letting the Savile scandal go on unnoticed in the 30 years, which is actually not only Conservative government or Labour governments, but Conservative governments as well. That happened over 30 years, and that was a massive mistake of the BBC. Now, should that scandal lead to the abolition of the licence fee? Well, 50% of the country think not, because post Savile scandal, over 50% of the country still believed and had full trust in the BBC and in the mechanisms that the BBC changed after the Savile scandal. And if we look at this from a point of perspective, only 24% of the UK population voted Conservative in the general election in May. that means that 24% of the population said, I trust you to run our country. More than double that are saying, we trust you to be the public service broadcaster, and that there is an endorsement for the BBC in this age.
And then for myself to answer Laura's question, I do stand by what I said in that we do need these educational provisions, and if we do not have the BBC programmes and educational programmes are still used in schools today. We still use resources that are, and I stand by that as well. The resources that are created by the BBC, snippets of programmes, documentaries are used in schools today. And if we do not have, as myself and Conal have been saying, if we do not have the licence fee, we do not have a complete BBC. So these, albeit they are probably not watched today on children's sick days, but these things that we did, they have evolved into the services that people would use now. A child going on the internet onto maybe BBC Bite Size or BBC News, that has evolved from the programmes that we used to watch when we were little, or I did anyway. And if we don't have this evolution, and if we don't maintain this evolution, then that essential service will be gone.
And also, the fact is that the BBC have an authoritative voice in 21st century, and in the internet age where we have the Huffington Post and Internet News and Channel 4, the BBC is one of these, is a factual based organisation that isn't one of the 100 billion personalised truths that we have. The problem with society today, and the problem with the age of the internet and society's kind of flirtatious idea with the internet, is that every single thing posted on there seems to have the same legitimacy. And what the BBC gives us is an authority in whenever we are researching. The internet is the white bread for the mind, if you like, today, and the BBC is something that is far more nutritious for our brains and everything like that.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to ask Roscoe and Mal, what is your killer question to Cross and Passion?
Okay, you keep using these 2013 statistics on how many people actually support the BBC licence fee, except for our research we found that in 2015, in May this year, it was actually, 61.67% voted for the removal of the licence fee altogether. Only 28.82% supported the current model in its entirety. So I'd like to ask you, how do you justify using outdated statistics to try and back up your claims whenever the more up-to-date model of the BBC post all these scandals is actually dead set against it? And this is a poll of about 5,500 people, so it's certainly representative of the widespread society of Britain today.
So a poll of 5,500 people, I think we learned from the general election that pollsters get it wrong, and whenever the 2013 statistics, the size of the sample was bigger in 2013, now in 2015 they weren't able to conduct that same sample. I understand that in that 4,500 people there were people, 61% wanted the licence fee gone, but the polls can get it wrong. And also we need to move to the fact that if we want to have an honest conversation of the licence fee, let's not say we want total abolition because we say so, because Michael Gove decides that he wants to decriminalise it. Let's put it to a referendum and let's see where people want, or what David Cameron is doing in Europe, to say we will campaign for a reformed BBC instead of the abolition of the licence fee, and thus the abolition of the BBC.
You can come back to that. Yeah, where you go?
Well, what I'd like to respond to that is with the idea that this is certainly a representative sample. This was definitely done on a lot of the online media players, which is where definitely everything's moving on to anyway. It's going less on TV and more on things like iPlayer, 4OD, UTV Player, all that. So this is the idea of new people coming through. This is the idea of the next generation who are already clued in, who watch things on their smart TVs online, who watch things on their tablets, who watch things on their laptops. So I definitely think that is definitely something to look at for the future, considering these are the people who will be leading, or who will be coming through to our country in the years to come. So this is more a representation of perhaps probably more younger people. And this is their views on society. And also I'd like to say, if it says here that 61.67% of people voted for the removal of the licence fee altogether, how in your conscience, as the UK, as a democratic country, can you say that's not the will of the people?
Because that is a poll, and that's not the will of the people, because that is, if we think 4,500 people, there are 64 plus million people in the UK. Now 4,500 people is tiny in compared to 64 million. Now I understand that there's not going to be 100% turnout at referendum, so let's talk about 30 million electorate or 24 million electorate. electorate. That's a lot more than the 4,500 people in that poll.
Okay, just come back on that. You were talking about how the pollsters got it wrong. For the general election, you're right, they did get it wrong, but they got it wrong by 3% each way. This was not an absolutely huge landslide where they just didn't predict anything. And I have to say that I think if the swing between 10% is a bit too extreme even for you to just blame pollsters, I can't accept it. Like, you need to accept that these are the figures and these are the most up-to-date figures we have on BBC licence fee.
And Mr. Burns, you seem very set on rallying against polls. You yourself are using polls for your esteemed statistics.
Using
You want to give your question at the end of this as well? You can respond and then give your question.
There was a phrase I came across when I was doing my research, which I very much enjoyed: techno-determinism. We need, basically, just because digital technology changes and we are using the internet more, which is rightly so, doesn't make it possible. Doesn't mean that the BBC and the services it provides are inevitably need to be destroyed. BBC iPlayer is miles ahead of 4OD. It's award-winning program or award-winning website, and we are miles ahead of 4OD, ITV Player, Demand 5. We are functional. Its functionality and the support that it provides as a service of a branch of the BBC is groundbreaking. And if we get rid of the BBC, we ultimately deplete the value of that, which is a service widely used.
And the licence fee hasn't been able to empower the BBC to go forward. The BBC is not this outdated model in the 21st century. The BBC is the lead partner in a cross industry party or in a cross industry grouping to have 4K HD TV, and BBC before Channel 4, ITV and Channel 5 will have 4K HD for its people. So it is investing in its people, it is investing in the quality of its service.
What's your question, Cross and Passion? Then you can
Okay.
Our question is why would we just try to abolish something that has worked for 90 years? There has been a scandal. The BBC has put the measures in place to recover from that scandal. There are some polls, but why would we leave something that has steadfastly given us support over the last 90 years?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to respond to Miss Hughes' point, where she was talking about, I mean, your whole speech is centred definitely around very much that BBC is there for the education of the masses, this sort of socialist dream where the whole nation gets better, except BBC iPlayer removes its documentaries after 30 days, and 4OD holds all of its documentaries on there for the whole time, and often you'll find that 4OD takes the documentaries that no one else wants to touch. I mean, it's definitely gone very in-depth into the Iraq War, which no one else wants to touch because it's definitely a very a controversial issue. So I just don't really understand your logic behind, if you want this idea of mass education for everyone, why you're then dismissing 4OD as lesser and hasn't won all these awards when it's actually holding more educational programmes than the BBC iPlayer is currently at this point in time.
You want to respond to the question first of all?
Yes, I'd like to respond to Mr. Burns' question. You seem to be stuck in this dreamland of 90 years ago. Mr. Burns, the world has changed so much in 90 years. We've seen, I think I mentioned the word globalisation, we've seen the rise of internet media, we've seen media vastly change, and I think it is an outdated principle if you're looking back for it as just some kind of tradition that we should always keep. Is that okay?
Am I really?
Yeah.
There's a word that I've used a lot during this debate that seems to have been a bit glossed over, which is evolution. I've used it constantly. I feel like I'm using it too much almost, but the BBC has evolved. We know that, and it has created these extra services. And so I feel like I'm saying it for the 100th time, but I feel it's an important point. Without the BBC having created 90 years ago and catering to the needs of those people at that time, has now evolved and created services which cater to our needs at this time.
Certainly, you're right. The BBC should definitely evolve, and that's why we're opposing the abolition of the licence fee.
It has evolved, and you seem to not recognise the fact that they are leading in the 4K HD initiative. They are leading in terms of internet players. The BBC iPlayer and the BBC World Service. You talked about globalisation, Mr. Weir. Well, 250 million people use the BBC every week. If that is not globalisation, then I do not know what is globalisation, because the BBC serves the world. It is our is the thing that we can best export across the whole entire world, and it's something that we should be proud of.
Okay, can I just come back? You've said the BBC is something that is part of the world. It's this sort of worldly notion, except you're also going on your 4K screens point. And I'd just like to point out, currently they're sitting around £3,000 to buy. And for me, that really isn't for the world. That's for the rich upper classes who can afford to spend £3,000 on a TV screen. And it's not.
You missed the point. The 4K HD is not to the 250 million people. The BBC service, which you say is outdated and outmoded, is still used by 250 million people in the world. The biggest broadcaster in the world, used by more people than anyone else.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in it there.
Sorry.
Put it all in your summation. I know I went way over there, but I just think I like this bit. I think it's good that you get it all out of your system. It's very cathartic. Are there any burning audience questions? I didn't think there would be. Thanks for asking some when Joel was in the room. I was like, guys, come on. So that means that we're going to go straight into summation. So anything that you don't think you said there, any points that you don't think were addressed, then bring them out now. Try and respond to what the other team said. Again, you're going to have a minute to sum up your key arguments, and I'm going to knock the table at 30 seconds so you know how long you've got left. So we'll go in the order we spoke in. So Callum from Royal Scholar Math, you want to go first?
Thank you. Let me pose a question to the opposition. ITV has the Rugby World Cup. It was broadcasted every single game without having to pay for it in the same way that the BBC does, off of the backs of the British taxpayer. Isn't there a better alternative to this? Mr. Burns also seems to like to enjoy talking about the fact that 250 million people watch the BBC. Well, 250 million people watch the BBC America. BBC America is a commercially funded and privatised company. Let me pose you all a question to finish. What was the last piece of great drama the BBC has produced? Any answer is almost certain to be a rehash of a rehash of a rehash. The fact is that we are not paying for innovative TV. This does not just extend to drama, however. Staples of British TV, such as the aforementioned Great British Bake Off and Strictly Come Dancing, are based on commercially successful American programmes. Thank you.
I'm sure Simon's going to pick up where you left off and complete the speech. Okay, Cross and Passion, Saoirse, final word. Oh, don't worry. No, don't worry. It's fine. Big feet.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard much tonight about fairness, transparency, cultural awareness and social cohesion in our multicultural society. I would like to thank the proposition for their words. They have gifted us a perfect moniker for a publicly funded BBC. Privatisation has its place, but it's done little for the railways, the NHS, education and utilities. ITV, which is not the envy of the world, and Sky, which is a state-sanctioned sports monopoly, do little to convince us to ring the death knell for the licence fee. Ladies and gentlemen, the BBC upholds genuine British values at home and offers great PR for our country overseas. We achieve this PR, Mr. Brown, without having to resort to a BBC that can be bought. We enjoy, whether we realise it or not, a BBC which can inform all of us, objectively and clearly, helping to shape the future of Britain. The BBC is one of the few British institutions that seems to embrace a multicultural society and show how it can work. Abolishing the licence fee will be the death knell for the BBC. It is that black and white. We really need to look at the motion to prove this. A death knell that I'm sure no one will be willing to bring. Thank you.
Okay, final word for the proposition goes to Simon.
Okay. First of all, I'd love to say that this idea of evolution is absolutely fantastic, and you are so right with evolution, because 90% of the British public watched the BBC Olympics in 2012 on their televisions through BBC, and I think that is fantastic. However, BBC are now losing this, which means they will have to come up with either a lot of money, which won't be able to be afforded by the licence fee, or they'll have to evolve into a better model and a more commercially substantive model. I'd also like to go on that you've talked about how the BBC exports to the world and the world comes to the BBC. That's definitely one of the 5 tenets that they've started out and they want to stick to. Except that the only BBC that's actually paid for by licence fee is the one in Britain. Any other subsidiaries of the BBC are all commercially privatised, which definitely shows us that with all the new ones that come in from BBC Americas, as well as the ones from Asia as well, like those wonderful documentaries in the Borneo and the Amazon, all those wonderful things that we love to see on our TVs, that's all commercially funded. So I really don't understand why we need this archaic system in place anymore. Thank you.
well done, Royal School. And final word of the whole debate goes to Colin.
The BBC is the best of British. It's one of the last remaining organisations where we can punch above our weight on the world stage. It's one of the last remaining areas of British society which is protected from free market fundamentalists. It's one of the last remaining institutions of which we can be proud. The BBC punctuates our day from breakfast to newsnight, making us more informed, more assured and more confident in ourselves. The Great British Bake Off, Mr. Wade, a prime-time cooking TV show. Where else in the world would that happen? Who else would take the courage to do that first? Only the best, only the BBC. Before we abolish the licence fee, let's think of what we get for our money. 8 top-class national TV stations, 15 national radio stations, an instant playback iPlayer, a red button, 20,000 jobs, and a world service funded by the licence fee because 30 million in commercial interest will not fund the world service. We are right to celebrate the beep. Thank you.
I regret bringing the bake off. I know. Yeah, so a massive well done to both schools. I've done debates at a regional, a qualifying and at a national level, and that would have been a worthy national final. I think both schools have put so much effort in, and whoever goes through will be a worthy credit to Northern Ireland in the Scottish final. So massive well done to both schools. Breathing aside, we're now going to go to the judges. If you just give, we're going to do feedback for each side, and then I'm going to ask you to leave and deliberate, and then we'll come back and find out who's won. So we'll start off with Sinead, and we'll start off with Royal School Armagh for feedback.
I have to say, and to state my own personal interest, I'm pro-BBC, so you did a brilliant job in actually convincing me the other way. I thought your arguments were reasoned and informed. You were confident, yet conversational when you needed to be, and I think the real skill you showed is how you listened to the other side and actually posed questions then that were relevant and pointed. And I think you should be commended for that. You're both very confident speakers. I wish I had that confidence when I was your age, now at times even. So I think you should be very proud of the performance that you did. Very strong delivery, and I think the fact that you knew the subject matter and you were passionate about it. I don't know if it's actually your stance, but I believed you.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I would say the same in terms of your presentation and getting the message out there. I thought it was very good. I thought you were maybe slightly over reliant on statistics, and I think both teams suffered from this a little bit. I think that you both came at it from an ideological standpoint, and that was your point of view, and every argument flowed from that. So I think that both teams just show a slightly more rounded, nuanced view, taking in kind of more strange of thought. I think would be better. But other than that, yeah, really funny and engaging and kind of very. Again, I didn't agree with the word you were saying, but I didn't hate you for it, which is
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You got feedback.
Thank you. You're probably on that side. I just if I'd been in the pool, I'd have been. But again, yeah, very confident, and particularly Simon at the start, you came out with no real notes. I mean, I know they were there, but you didn't really look at them at the start. You were just, and you did feel impassioned that he really believes what it can make you do. But again, both of you very confident, and definitely decided who was taking which argument or who was going to come back on which point. So you sort of knew who was going to be taking which argument. I think we're very good about coming back when we picked up on the Asian network, because that was the one thing. It was like, right, let's jump on that. But yeah, no, I think both did very well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, why not? Right, now Crossing Passion. We'll go the other way down the line, so Joanna, do you want to
Okay, I think the BBC should actually be when you. I mean, when you first spoke, I went, maybe that was probably biased on my part too, because I was probably already on your side of the argument maybe, but I do definitely think at the start you could tell you definitely had a passion and a real energy in your arguments, that you believed this, and you were very articulate in how you put forth the argument. Both teams, you were pretty unflappable when you were coming back with each other, which was good. There was no defence there. You were confident in coming back with good reposts, no matter what either the audience or each other came at. But yeah, no, both of you excellent in your delivery and articulate, confident. Definitely, there's a lot to be learned from it going forward.
Robin?
Yes, again, it was, as I said, but I wouldn't repeat the kind of ideological thing. I think that there's maybe, where they were maybe too reliant on statistics, I felt that you kind of hammered away at the kind of, which I would say is the biggest flaw in the BBC, is the kind of political objectivity and the kind of news service. They maybe didn't give you the room in order to go for that nuance, and they maybe should have said about you guys, I think a major flaw was setting out such a kind of absolute position at the very start. I think allowing nuance would give you a lot more room. You could make the same points, but you would have a little more room for manoeuvre. I thought you guys were a really good team. It was kind of like the head and the heart, a lot of it. But not to say that you weren't in any way substantive or you weren't passionate, but it kind of like, I thought that that worked really well. Yeah, that's it.
Sinead?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you complemented each other really well, and that you had clearly worked together in forming your response. I really believed you. You know, I mean, I think Conleth, you could get a job in PR for the BBC. There's no doubt in my mind for that. I think. You both sat out the stall from the beginning, and you didn't drop your position, and you were engaging in the questions section. So I would just say maybe the notes, I think, hindered you a little bit just in the questions and the rebuttals. But I mean, that's something I find with public speaking. Actually, if I have notes in front of me, it just throws me off. But it's too many notes. I mean, obviously you need your key points, but I thought overall you were both fantastic. I thought that you maybe I think the statistics, as has been mentioned, played a bit too much of a role in the discussion, but I certainly got the passion about the argument coming from you, and I felt that, you know, very strongly that this is a case that, how can there possibly be an argument here? You know, so well done.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our judges for their feedback. So I'm now going to ask you guys to leave and come back eventually and think of a winning team and also a best individual. I'll come in a minute and give you Rochelle and Sally's thoughts on who best individual should be. So I think the room that we ate in should be free. If you want to go, and then they're leaving, but we're staying
here.
I'm going with this.
Just so you can.
Yeah, well,
too nervous.
Yeah, and just give us a shout whenever you're ready to announce the winner. Well done, guys. Honestly, one of the best
Very well
I've
done.
ever seen.
I don't think I've had so much crack in the debate. Like,
Sorry?
I don't think I've had so much crack in the debate about that. Like.
It's very, very nice. Okay, judges, over to you. If you want to do best individual first, and then some reasons for your answer, and then the winner.
Okay, so it was quite hard because, particularly as well, that maybe there wasn't that much time to any, but everybody really only got to ask one real question. So we also took into consideration then how you performed when questions were asked to you. So it's not only how did you ask the questions, what sort of questions you asked, but how did you react when asked the questions. So we narrowed it down to 3, but at the end of the day we decided Orla from Crossing Passion.
And then the big one.
Big one. So I think firstly just to say that it was so close and we were really impressed by both schools. We thought you were each fantastic, and as I said earlier, if I had your level of passion and ability to speak in public when I was your age, I think you've all got very bright futures ahead of you. In the end, we felt that it came down to the summations, and we were very impressed throughout the whole process. But we felt that one school had the slight edge, and that we were compelled to believe that side of the argument, and we have decided that the winners are.
Fantastic, well done to Cross and Passion. Have a great time in Glasgow. I will hopefully see you there. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, absolute commiserations to Royal School Armagh. You could have such a strong showing. You could have gone the whole way, and again, it was so close. I can attest to the fact the judges were fighting the bit out over it because it was really that close. And I wish you all the best in your other debating competitions, and please come back next year and go to Scotland and show the Scots and the English how to dance. And big thanks to all the judges for giving up their time to come and give the teams a really good run for their money, and we couldn't do it without them, so thank you very much. And thank you to the BMR sponsor, the Welcome Trust. Everyone support the Welcome Trust. They're fabulous people who give us money. And Queen's and the Literarific Society for putting us up today. So once again, massive commiserations to Royal School. Such a good showing, and well done to Cross and Passion. Congratulations. If the judges want to come for a drink, I think that's
They need one after that.
Yeah.
I think we're taking one before.